Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Laurent Lemeur from Media Lab, and I will quickly present to you the speakers of this session. Liisa McCloy-Kelly is Vice President, Director of eBook Development and Innovation at Penguin Random House. She co-leads a team of developers, designers, and producers who are responsible of the ebook in Penguin Random House US divisions, as well as many of their client publishers. And she is also the co-chair of the W3C Publishing Business Group. Daihei Shiohama is the CEO of Mediado International, a Japanese organization, a big Japanese organization, and he also co-leads the co-chair, the W3C Publishing Business Group with Liisa. He is also a leader of the Advanced Publishing Laboratory in China, which is a partner of Idea Lab. And Alex Grover is Senior Manager of eBook Technologies at Penguin Random House. And Alex will have the role of moderator today. So let's start. Just before you can ask questions on Swapcard via the live discussion panel that you find on the session that we are using at the moment. So you go to live discussion, you find chat, questions, and the polls. We have organized the poll. So during the session, please look at the poll and answer the question. We look at the results at the end of the session. The chat is really chat between you, and the questions are the questions that Alex will read to Liisa and Daihei for having answers from you. Okay, Liisa, you've got the floor.
Great, thank you, Laurent. Welcome. Daihei and I co-chair the Publishing Business Group in the Publishing at W3C work, along with Christina Musinelli, who you may recognize from some other sessions this week. And hopefully Christina is joining us and will pipe up if she has some color to add to anything we have to say. We wanted to talk to all of you today about the fact that we're moving forward with the work on EPUB after having done an extensive survey that we organized within the W3C. So let's just start by saying that EPUB is here to stay. But what we discovered in the survey is that we're not done yet. There's a lot of things that people want for EPUB and that they would like to be able to use EPUB for, that are advancements on what we already have. And we discovered actually that EPUB is more widely used around the world than we even knew, that there's a real desire with implementers, both on the authoring side and publication side and on the reading system side, to ensure that EPUB has a good, strong life, that the catalogs that people have made with it are vibrant and can go on. And then this is fully backwards compatible with anything that we do going forward. Some of the things that we heard that EPUB could really use are some improvements to make better experiences for other kinds of content, some better implementations so that more of the features are supported, and better understanding across all of the ecosystems. We found that there were a lot of comments that we got through the course of the survey that just illustrated that education is something that we really need to focus on to make sure that everybody's using the standard to its full potential. Some background on the survey. So at the end of last year, the Publishing Business Group, our publishing community groups, the EPUB and publishing community groups within the W3C, and the Publishing Working Group, were really trying to figure out what did publishing need beyond the work of the current Publishing Working Group and the work that they are doing to finish the audio spec this summer. And we decided that a good way to do this was to have a survey. And we were a little skeptical because people don't always answer surveys or you don't necessarily get really great information out of it. So we worked really hard to try to craft a survey that might entice people to answer. And we were incredibly surprised at what we got back. We conducted the survey during the month of February. We left it out there for about a month and started to wrap it up once everyone was a little too overwhelmed with COVID to pay much attention. And more than 250 people from around the world responded. We unfortunately made the mistake of not getting enough information about exactly what areas of the world each of these respondents were from, because we were really trying to give people a safe place to anonymously give feedback. And definitely that's a lesson learned. So there's some of this that we can tie to parts of the world and the experience in those parts of the world. And Dahi can certainly talk to what of that came from Japan. But we don't have answers to all of that. We had 85 questions and a lot of write-ins, and we did not expect to get as many essay answers as we did. And the questions that we asked were relative to the uses of EPUB, features, challenges. We were really trying to broaden the scope of what we were asking so that readers would feel compelled to answer, reading system engineers would feel compelled to answer, people in spaces that are not traditional trade publishing would feel compelled to answer, people who are struggling with accessibility would feel compelled. So all the questions were optional. We did not have many people who actually answered the entire survey. People kind of picked and choose which pieces of it they really wanted. And Dahi, do you want to add anything about the outreach we had to other countries?
Yes, certainly. Not only Japan, where the EPUB, especially EPUB 3, is being used almost like 100% for distribution of ebooks. So there are probably close to 10% of this, the entire responders, Japanese, the digital publishing related people came back. But also that my understanding is that in Europe and also that there are other parts of the world people responded to. So this is a very diversified, territorial people's, the response. And then also that I will look into the kind of the area where they belong to in the digital publishing. You'll be probably surprised.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that, we tried really hard to figure out if translations would help for people to make it as accessible as we could. And as I said, we were really happy and surprised with the amount of response that we got. The demographics of the people that we surveyed, we know that many people, because we made so many of these multiple choice answers, so many people responded from multiple perspectives for this. And we're used to hearing a lot from the trade publication world, but we were really happy to see that we heard from a lot of ebook developers in this. Nearly 50% of these people were ebook developers. And we were thrilled to see that we heard from so many readers and that we heard from a number of authors. We were happy to see that education and professional publishing, people felt compelled to voice their needs. So it was a really nice, diverse group of people. And as you can see, there are 155 responses to this demographic, though we had over 250 answers overall. So we didn't get every bit of demographic, but we got enough to know that it was a nice representation. Some of the big takeaways, to just lay it out there, as I said before, EPUB 3 is well adopted, but it needs to be more fully implemented by content creators and reading systems. People want more features, and there were a lot more features requested than we had expected. More education is needed. We discovered that people get their information about EPUB from a variety of sources. There's a lot of it that's in-house knowledge. There's some of it that are local organizations. Some of it's coming from the W3C, from our groups. But it's also coming from blogs and articles, and people are piecing this stuff together. Lack of reading system support is a really big issue for content producers that we heard a lot about. And we were surprised to see exactly what the mix of product that people are putting into the market is. EPUB 2, EPUB 3, and PDF are all used, as well as some proprietary formats. But we were happy to see that 72% of the respondents published just EPUB 3. And another 20% published both EPUB 2 and EPUB 3. There were 51% who said they supported at least some EPUB 2 titles in their backlist, and 55% who still create PDF ebooks, mainly because that's what's requested from retailers, and that's what people feel like is needed for certain marketplaces. We were really intrigued to find out more about how people are using fixed layout, because there are a lot of theories that fixed layout should not be used for every bit of content that you could throw it at. And what we found out is that it's used a lot for children's picture books. It's used for graphic novels, sometimes humor titles, education titles, cookbooks, magazines, documentation. And when we asked the questions about why people use fixed layout for these things, and not reflow, the overwhelming answers were that it's that inability to have images extend to the bleed and reflow, and that being a requirement for content. It's just too expensive or hard to relay out books from where they existed. Authors and designers sometimes really pressured because they feel like this is the best experience. And there are a lot of developers who feel like if they were going to go to that effort, the lack of media queries and modern CSS support doesn't give them as much control as they would like. Jahe, do you want to talk a little bit to how the Japanese market is using fixed layout?
Sure. In fact, the Japan's ebook business is already existing. Exceeding $4 billion size of the market. And 85% of that is coming from manga, the Japanese comics. And that is practically using 100% of fixed layout for that manga, which is the key success reason of the Japanese ebook business. And especially that the fixed layout, the cost of making it is cheaper than the reflow books, as far as the Japanese complex the typesettings are concerned. So practically Japan is the one of the largest ebook market, and then FXL is the biggest the format being used.
Great, thank you.
Lisa, we have a question from Michaelis.
Yeah.
At your W3C blog post on survey, you highlighted a responder's comment that EPUB is fine, but reading systems limit its potential. So why are reading systems slow to adopt the entirety of EPUB specifications?
I think we're going to get there. And we're going to talk a little bit later about why the reading systems are having trouble with some of this stuff. And so let's hang on to that for a minute.
And then just another question from Carlos. When the ebooks do not include any multimedia content, not videos, not audio, the only thing that would be different between converting to EPUB 2 to EPUB 3 in these cases, what is the best choice for converting?
If you're going to use EPUB and you're doing it with new content and new conversions, you should always use EPUB 3. It's just more modern. It is more widely supported across what the new reading systems are developing. And there are less limits for what you can do. Okay. So EPUB today one of the things that we really heard from the survey is that there's a desire to mix fixed layout and reflow pages. 60% of the respondents wanted to do that. And when we talked about what kind of content that might work for, there were, beyond kids' picture books, other children's titles that would really benefit from art that went to the edges of pages. Magazines would love to do this. It would make a big difference and a better experience for cooking and craft books. Art and highly illustrated coffee table books that are oftentimes not made into ebooks would benefit from it. And there's a comic manga text hybrid idea that is out there that would really benefit from this. And the really big thing is that this technically does exist already in EPUB, but because it is not yet well supported across the reading systems, it isn't implemented anywhere. It's the classic chicken and egg problem that we have in the digital publishing world of producers of content don't want to make the features until they know that they can support them in the marketplace. And the people who are building the reading systems for the marketplace don't want to put the work into the feature support until they know that they're going to get the content. So this is one of those things that we in the business group are starting to explore. How would people use this? What is the business case for it? Because we really think that if we do some testing and we push forward with this, we can kind of get to that resolution where the reading systems could accept it and we could actually move on and improve content experience for a lot of titles and move the needle some with the standard that we already have.
We have a question from Miro, but also a suggestion to answer questions at the end in the Q&A. So we'll maybe answer this question now.
Let's get to the questions when we get through.
Sounds great.
So just a minute to talk about how EPUBs get made today. There was nothing that was a big surprise here. Lots of people are using InDesign workflows, but as input. They're also using Word and PDF and HTML and XML. Processes, there was actually kind of a surprising 60% of the answers that said that people use some kind of custom tool or process, something they've developed themselves or they bought into. But there's also InDesign exports and kind of relatively few people at this point, only 21% noted that they primarily make their content with offshore partners. People are using lots of editors, Sigil, Oxygen, BB Edit. It's just lots of different ways that you can edit the HTML, and that's kind of a personal preference thing. And we were happy to see that people are using a lot of different kinds of tools for testing. Apple Books, ADE, Kindle Previewer, Kobo, and EPUB Check were the top ones. But I just personally wanted to note that Thorium is really good and is a great app to use both for your testing and for your accessibility testing. Dahe, in Japan, are they using similar tools?
Yeah, but I think the mostly that InDesign export and then the sort of existing systems tools are being used. Some are using the custom processing, but at the same time because of the FXL is mostly used, it's relatively easy to convert from the original source the file to the EPUB 3 fixed layout in Japan.
Thank you. So what people really want to see, 175 of our survey respondents answered about what they wanted to see implemented in the spec. And the biggest thing was dual language support. And we were really surprised by this because it has just not come up a lot in discussions about the fact that people want to be able to, have books that are in Russian and English and have facing pages that people can compare. And notifications for readers when content is updated, and a way to do that so that it consistently happens and you're not so dependent on reading systems was a big feature that people wanted. Background images were things that people wanted better support for. It can be very tricky to do. Testing and practice test scoring was a big feature. Map integrations, people really thought would be helpful. Full bleed images, which gets us back to that mix of fixed and reflow, are helpful. And we'll fill in worksheets. There are a lot of workbooks out there that don't necessarily need to be an app, but could be a much better book experience if there were some fill-ins. And there were lots of other things that we asked people about and that they responded on. At the end of this, we'll give you a link to a more lengthy evaluation of the results, and you can look into it more. We also asked people if they would use scripting, and 73% of the respondents said that they would use scripting if it was supported. The top things they thought they'd use it for were those quizzes, for charts and graphics, for interactive images, for sorting tables, for children's books and making them interactive, and for that map integration. So you see where the features really tie into the scripting that people are looking for. And in the education space, they really wanted more interactivity, reliability, the ability to print, support for MathML. And it came across that accessibility is a really critical issue in the education space, and being able to share results and access local storage for that interactivity and quizzes, and some kind of integration of EPUB into university workflows. It seems that EPUB doesn't fit necessarily easily as it exists currently into the workflows that go for content development for universities. In the education space, 67% of our respondents considered distributing EPUB to students. 85% were concerned with the accessibility. 77% considered the ability to open an EPUB without a dedicated reading system very important, which we thought was quite interesting. And there seems to be a growing interest in dynamic publications that can be updated by the publisher automatically, particularly in this space. And I think that's one of those places where the needs of different segments of the market are different. In asking questions of readers, we asked what kinds of devices they read on, and we're really surprised to see what a high preference there was for reading on phones. And this shouldn't be surprising. And I think that more and more people are reading on phones, but traditionally, content developers have not necessarily thought about the devices being that small. And when we asked about how they're acquiring books, we were surprised to see what a big part the public domain plays in this. Not surprised at all to see commercial retailers and libraries and subscription, but that public domain was a little bit bigger than I expected. We also were really kind of pleased to see that 74% of people use multiple reading systems, and for a variety of reasons. They may have switched from one to another. They may do it for content availability. They may do it for the mix of being able to use library content and purchase content. All good reasons, but good to see that people aren't feeling like they're locked down into a particular reading system and that they're finding comfort with reading digitally. Dahe, did you want to talk a little bit about the phone use in Asia?
Sure. In Japan, the smartphones are really widely used, probably exceeding 80% of the entire readers that are using the smartphones. And then for some reason, the PCs are not much used. And also the ebook dedicated readers, they are not so popular in Japan. So primarily, small fonts are the driving force for ebook reading.
Great, thank you. And we asked readers what drives them crazy. And what we found out were all of the things that we hear from reading system providers about typos and bad formatting and generic formatting and bad typesetting and poor image quality. And really a lot of complaints about the lack of linking or bad links, lack of pagination, bugs in reading systems, lack of accessibility, inconsistent quality, and an overwhelming feeling that readers still think that publishers think of ebooks as an afterthought and think that the publication that they're reading shows that. And I think this is a challenge to all of us to try to think about how do we make these things better? And particularly as we go back and look to maintain catalogs of backlist content, because I look at this and think, yeah, that's a lot of it true, but a lot of it is because some of the stuff that we have in the market has been out there for 20 years. And it's a good time to start thinking about how do you solve these issues. When we ask readers about their top favorite features, easy navigation, changing font sizes, searching, being able to enlarge images, bookmarking, changing brightness, footnotes that pop up, organizing libraries, those are all the things that people really like about their digital reading experience. And you think about how much of that is really a shift away from physical, right? And is something that is very specific to e-reading systems, as opposed to a lot of it not as easily available on just general web. We heard from the reading system implementers, and to that question that was asked previously, and they told us that the hardest features for them to implement are media overlays, fixed layout rendering, JavaScript engines, OPF parsing, media support, and MathML. And 83% of the reading system developers wanted more information and conformance in the specification. 95% of them really wanted to see tests and would help build them. 37% said that they are displaying the accessibility metadata that users or publishers deliver, but they are all working on getting more of that metadata out there. And I think this really gets to the crux of, you know, again, that whole thing of some of this is really hard to implement. Some of it is hard to develop when you're developing the content, trying to find that point where what you're doing is not necessarily the lowest common denominator continues to be a challenge in this space. They also talked about what they're doing to modify content on ingestion. And this is one of the things that people who create content have always known and struggled with, because we produce a book and we test a book, but what we test is not necessarily what gets delivered to a reader. And the reasons that reading systems modify the content on ingestion, and they say that they convert files and optimize images, that they simplify the code for better performance, that they're inserting pagination and navigation features, that they're enabling device-specific features like annotations, that they're processing embedded media resources, and they're applying DRM. And understand all of that, but it doesn't make it easier for producers of content to ensure that the experience that they're going to get out there is what they want for readers. When we talk to people about accessibility, 48% of the respondents used ARIA roles. And a lot of people who are producing books really feel like their HTML is navigable by screen readers and keyboards. People are trying to include accessibility metadata in their files. Some of them are sending it with their metadata about the book. There is a bigger movement to provide alt text for non-decorative images than we had thought, and more people starting to include image descriptions. A lot of people who are starting to keep that page list in there so that you have some map back to print if it exists. People really seem to be more and more aware of the EPUB accessibility specification, and more than half are using it. The fixed layout is one of those exceptions. People don't really necessarily put a lot of effort into trying to make fixed layout accessible. It seemed like most people answered that, like, solve it for reflow first, and then we'll get to fixed layout. And there was some feeling that people are experiencing inconsistent levels of accessibility across reading systems. And again, that gets back to implementation and testing and struggle that we all have to work on together. So some of the interesting tidbits that came out of this is, when we started into this process of working on the survey, we really thought that people were not necessarily interested in EPUB being able to be open to read anywhere, because we had not gotten a lot of participation and involvement in the work that we were doing in the W3C to try to think about what that next phase for publications would be and how to make that more web friendly. And we find from the survey that actually people do want those things. And so now it's a matter of figuring out, how do we get there? We found that managing web links and link rot is a challenge for everyone across the ecosystems, the reading system providers, and it's just a reader sort of complaint that these things don't work, and trying to figure out how you address that. Most people are very reactive in addressing it. It's very time consuming to deal with. It is a really big challenge. Many people publish to the lowest common denominator, meaning that if you get 10 different requests for what image quality should be, maybe you just pick the lowest one you got and you go with that, or you pick the highest one you got and you go with that. But trying to find where that middle ground is very tough. And so there's a lot of content out there that is not as robust as it could be. And again, the testing in QA, the challenges are there for everybody because of the inconsistency, the difficulty side loading, the differences between content that is pre-publication and what something experiences once it's gone through someone's ingestion engine. And one of the biggest things that we came away from the survey with, is really understanding that lots and lots of people in lots of pockets around the world are unaware of all that EPUB can do currently, and how to implement that and use best practices for it. And we realize that more education is needed. Tahe, do you have any other tidbits to add?
Not much, but especially Japan is so much, using the use of the FXL. So the next phase of the requirement for the mix of the fixed layout and the reflow, which could jump to the much larger areas of content, can be taken into consideration of new kinds of the other publications. Basically, all the books in Japan, at least, is sourcing from the existing the print book content. But when these new features are coming along, I guess the digital native content could be possible. Thank you.
So how is publishing at W3C addressing all of this? Well, over the last few months, we have really worked hard to try to reorganize and to rethink how we're structured and how we're going to address the needs of the worldwide community. And the biggest thing that we're doing is we're actually chartering a new working group for EPUB 3. We're actually at a draft charter stage. They're accepting comments. We expect that this will likely go to an AC vote this summer, and that we will have a working group soon to move forward on making sure that EPUB becomes a full rec track spec within the W3C, that we have all of that conformance testing and interoperability, and that we do this ensuring that everything is completely backwards compatible and we're able to have a good framework for setting up new features. And the publishing community group and the EPUB community group are being merged into a new publishing community group that will be focused on incubating new ideas. So people want features, it goes to the community group to think about how would we implement that, to do some testing, to build out some content. And the publishing business group is going to shift our focus to not just discussing the business needs, but also working on more education and outreach and supporting a new GitHub repo that is for EPUB 3 reading system bugs. And we realize that if people who make content can make it clear what they're testing with reading systems is finding, those reading systems can then more easily address it. And we've talked to a lot of the major reading system providers, and they're really excited about the idea of having that help with testing and knowing which features people are interested in. And we've kind of restructured the publishing steering committee to be the chairs across these groups and to help coordinate the efforts across these groups so that something incubates, it gets vetted for whether there's a business need before we work on trying to put it into the standard. And so we're all really excited about where we're going with this work this year and how we're going to move it forward so that we can ensure that what we have as standards for EPUB and for the future works for everyone who wants to use it. If you want to get involved, there are more technical details about the survey results. You can join the publishing community group and start to participate. You can join the W3C as a member and get involved with either the business group and or the new working group. You can put your bugs into our GitHub repo. It's welcome to everyone to use. Or you can send your ideas or your bugs to Publishing at W3C Steering Committee, and we will work with you to address things. So now, wanted to open up for the questions that we had.
So we have a question from way back in the presentation from Miro. What do you think is the best way to convert PDF to EPUB and still have the best possible free-flowing text?
Honestly, Mira, there's not a lot of magic in that. You kind of want a vendor or somebody who's built a process. I don't know of any off-the-shelf software off the top of my head, but there are actually a lot of very cost-effective ways to offshore this kind of work and to have somebody parse it into good reflowable material from PDF.
And I do want to mention the folks were having issues with the polls earlier. Those are now usable. So feel free to look at the polls. And I think we can look at that information in a few minutes after we answer some more questions.
Yeah, we'd love to see you guys answer the polls and tell us, are you excited about any of these features? Are you excited about the idea of trying to move forward soon with a mix of fixed and reflow? If those are interesting to you, we'd love to hear from you.
Great. We have a few questions from Yanis. Should I constrain features I use in EPUB, example CSS, just because reader apps and devices have insufficient support for it? Or is it better to make use of all the features and hope that reader apps and devices will catch up?
That's a really great existential question. And one I think that, we at PRH really struggle with, because we find that sometimes we test something across reading systems and we realize there's CSS that works well enough on enough of them that we go ahead with it and think so-and-so will catch up. And then sometimes we see that something actually breaks kind of tragically. So we write up a bug and we, work with the engineering teams and different reading systems to let them know. But my hope is that we can start towards a world where you start actually using more of the CSS and that you don't necessarily stop because you feel like you can't use something. And because every time you do that, you're committing time in the future to coming back to that book and fixing it later. And if you can avoid that, I really would recommend you do.
Here's another question from Yanis. Regarding phones, when customers insist on this or that design, for example, wanting a font hardwired or large tables or images with text, I always ask, how do you think this would look on a phone? That usually drives home rethinking book design for them. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep reminding the people in your organizations that we are delivering content to be read across a variety of sizes of devices. And for people who have differing reading abilities, and it's really important to think about what's going to happen on that small device. And it's important to test for it. One thing that you mentioned that I would just caution about is to be very careful about embedding a font for body too often. And my own personal best practice is that you want to embed fonts where it's really going to help the style on your heads or on call outs or on extracted text, but not on the body, because you really want people to be able to change that body font if the reading system allows it, so that they cannot put it in for a dyslexic font, or they can find something that suits their preferences a little bit better. So maybe what you want to do for body is just note whether you want it to be a serif or a sans serif.
So I haven't asked if the slides are going to be remain public somewhere or be available. And this was answered in the chat, but it seems like the slides will be available after you review them, if you actually have to make any changes or anything.
I think we're just going to put the slides up as is.
Great. We have a few more questions. From Hadrian, are there any plans for a caniuse.com equivalent for reading systems maintained by the W3C?
Oh, Hadrian, that is a big question, isn't it? We have not yet figured out exactly how best to track all of this. We know that there was some amount of work done at one point on trying to make sure that there was a map of reading systems and features, and that became really, really hard to maintain. And I know it would be super helpful. And if you have ideas how we implement something like this, we'd love to hear them. And because it's one of those things that trying to figure out, like, how do we gather this information? How do we make sure it's public? And how do we do it in a way that's, gives reading systems the ability to also know what they're working on if they want to. So yeah, if you have ideas about how we get that done, or you want to help, please let us know.
A question from Michalis regarding, oh, it jumped up. Regarding notifications for readers when content updates. This is part of the polls. The biggest challenge is you can't update the content without messing, to my understanding, with readers' highlights or bookmarks.
So right now what we're talking about is a way that perhaps in the metadata for the file that a publisher could actually indicate that they have made a change and what kind of change that might be. What we're finding in the marketplace is, and then letting reading systems figure out how to surface that and to notify people that things are different. We know that reading systems struggle with the fact that they sidecar any information that people have about bookmarks and highlights, and that when they reprocess content coming into their systems and they don't know what has changed from a publisher, or maybe they only are noting the things that they have asked for to be changed from a publisher, that they have a difficulty with figuring out whether that sidecar is any way affected with the locations that are mapped in it. And if we could work together to find a better way to let people know that there are options for getting updated content, it would really make a difference, because what we often find happening in the marketplace is that an author will come back to something and write a new introduction. They'll update links. They'll, actually change things, improve things, fix factual problems. And someone who has previously gotten that content may not even know that it has changed, much less be given an option of whether they're willing to perhaps sacrifice their notes. And what we're trying to do is just get to a place where there's a better mechanism for everyone to know that those updates have happened.
Yeah, and on that note, Yanis replied, yes, I wish there was a reported typo infrastructure that feeds back to publishers. At the end of the day, ebooks should be treated like software.
And be careful what you ask for there, because I will tell you from personal experience that many of the people who report typos just don't understand the language. And not all typos that are reported are real. In fact, 85% of the things that are reported are not. And I say this with great confidence because I've literally over the last year looked at thousands and thousands of reader complaints. And there are typos out there. There are also lots of people who have opinions about words or opinions about grammar and are not necessarily worth spending the time to go through and try to explain everything. Dictionaries don't understand colloquial language.
In a different direction, here's a question from Adrian again. Supporting EPUB 3 entirely is a massive task for reading systems. What's the approach for future additions to the spec? Will the working group continue to maintain a single specification? Any thoughts about modules and or levels of conformance?
I don't think that that's been entirely established yet. I think that there is some feeling that the documentation will come together in one specification. But we have not gotten to a place where we started talking about exactly whether there would be levels or conformance testing. Everybody understands that for conformance testing, there need to be implementations of something typically more than one implementation. And there are so many different reading systems that can count in that more than one implementation. I think that it will still be a very likely thing that there will be some reading systems that have not implemented everything, and it will still be some amount of brokering between content producers and the reading systems that they actually use.
Right now, there's some great chatter about PDF to EPUB 3 and more thoughts on can I use. Maybe this is a good time to look at the polls.
Yeah, great.
And look at those. Okay, so for the first question, which of the top requested EPUB features would you use in your content? Let me refresh just in case. We have, out of 17 votes, 18% for dual language support, 18% for notifications for readers when content updates, 13% for background images, 16% for testing and practice test scoring, 8% for map integrations, and 24% for fill-in worksheets.
Very interesting. So fill-in worksheets are more important to you guys than much of everything else. Great.
And for the second question, do you have content that would benefit from an ability to have a mix of fixed and reflow pages so that some images or pages could be full bleed and others would be reflowable and have the text resizable? This is an overwhelming yes with 78%, 21% no with 14 votes.
So if you have thoughts about what kinds of content you would try this on and you want to participate in any way, please let Dahe and I know, because we're working to try to gather some of the business requirements for this so that we can keep pushing this forward within the work that we're currently doing with the Publishing Business Group. Does anybody have any other questions? Anything else you want to know about the survey or the work that we're doing in the W3C? No? Okay.
Oh. Well, it seems perfect. It was a great presentation. Thank you very much, Liisa. Thank you very much, Dahe. And also, Alex, bravo for the moderation. It's hard work also to read all these messages, the chat, the questions, order the questions. You made a great job. I hope you can do the next presentations. Replace me for the next presentations.
Sure.
Well, if there is no other, I'm looking at the chat. If there is something else, no. If there is no other questions and no other exchange, let's stop there. Thank you very much. The session is recorded. It will be in 10 minutes as a recorded session at the same place on Swapcard. It will be also on the EDR Lab YouTube channel for later use. And Liisa, yes, if you can send me the slides, I will add them as an attachment to the session in Swapcard. So everybody can come back to this application for the years to come. It will stay there with the chat, with everything, if you want to review it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a nice day.
If you want to reach out, this is how you can get a hold of us.
Yes.
We have time for one last minute question. Or are we fully outroed? Okay. This is from Mary Ann. Are anyone in touch with Adobe in order to have InDesign exporting better EPUBs?
Yeah, actually, we do have one of the Adobe guys involved in a lot of our work, and there are ongoing discussions about how to improve that. But if you have feedback that you want us to get to them, please reach out. We are always happy to give them more information for more people. Thanks so much, everyone. If anything comes up that you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help.
Likewise.